After I became a widower, my son slapped me and said, "Either you wash my car and work as a gardener, or go live on the street." In despair, I accepted a 12-hour shift job taking care of a billionaire. He passed away, and the heir he chose was me. The gold digger called me 48 times. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. I never thought my own son would raise his hand to me. But there I was, at 66 years old, standing in my kitchen with my cheek burning from Fred's slap, staring at the man I had raised and wondering how we had gotten here. "You're pathetic, old man," Fred spat, his face twisted with disgust. "Mom's been dead for 3 months and you're still moping around like some lost puppy. Well, guess what? The free ride is over." My legs felt weak. Martha had been gone for exactly 93 days, and each morning I still reached for her side of the bed, still made 2 cups of coffee out of habit. The grief was like a physical weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe sometimes. But Fred didn't care about that. "I'm grieving, son," I managed to whisper, my voice cracking. "Your mother was my everything for 42 years. Fred rolled his eyes dramatically. "Yeah, well, life goes on. And since you're living in my house now, eating my food, you're going to start earning your keep." His house. The word stung more than the slap. This had been Martha's and my home for 38 years. We had painted every room, planted every flower in the garden, fixed every creaky board. But when Martha got sick, the medical bills had drained our savings. Fred had convinced us to sign the house over to him to protect it from creditors. We trusted him. We believed he wanted to help. "What do you mean?" I asked, though I already dreaded the answer. Fred walked to the window and pointed at his BMW in the driveway. "See that car? It needs washing every week, and the lawn needs mowing, the garden needs weeding, the gutters need cleaning. You want to live here? You work for it." I felt something inside me crumble. "Fred, I'm your father, and I'm the one paying the bills now," he shot back. "Mom left you with nothing, and I'm not running a charity. You either contribute or you find somewhere else to live. And at your age, with no money, good luck with that." The next morning, I found myself on my hands and knees, scrubbing the hubcaps of Fred's car with an old toothbrush. The concrete driveway was rough against my knees, and my back ached from bending over. Several neighbors walked by during their morning jogs, their eyes filled with pity when they saw me. Mrs. Henderson from next door looked like she wanted to say something, but I turned away. I couldn't bear to see sympathy in her eyes. "You missed a spot," Fred called from the front porch, sipping his coffee. "And when you're done with that, the grass needs cutting. I have friends coming over tonight, and this place better look perfect." As I worked, memories of Fred as a little boy kept flooding back. I remembered teaching him to ride a bike in this very driveway, holding the back of his seat as he wobbled forward. I remembered the pride in his eyes when he hit his first home run, how he had run straight to me in the stands. Where had that little boy gone? The yard work took me 6 hours. My hands were blistered, my clothes soaked with sweat, and my entire body trembled with exhaustion. When I finally stumbled inside, Fred was sitting at the kitchen table with his friends, laughing loudly. "Hey guys, meet my live-in gardener," Fred announced, and his friends burst into laughter. "Dad, grab us some beers from the fridge, would you?" I stood there dirty and humiliated as these men who were young enough to be my sons snickered at me. One of them, a guy with slicked back hair, shook his head in amazement. "Man, Fred, I can't believe your old man actually does all this stuff for you. My dad would tell me to go to hell." Fred shrugged. What can I say? He knows which side his bread is buttered on. That night, I lay in the small guest room that Fred had assigned to me, staring at the ceiling. This room had once been Fred's nursery. I could still see the faint outline on the wall where we had hung his mobile with little airplanes. Martha and I had spent countless nights in here when he was sick, taking turns holding him, singing lullabies. Now he treated me like hired help. The pattern continued for weeks. Every morning, Fred would leave me a list of chores: wash his car, trim the hedges, clean the pool, scrub the bathroom floors. The work was endless, and no matter how hard I tried, it was never good enough. "The car still has water spots, old man," he would say, examining my work with a critical eye. "Do it again." Or, "I can still see leaves in the pool. What exactly do I pay you for? He didn't pay me anything, of course. My payment was a roof over my head, and whatever leftovers remained after Fred finished his meals. The worst part wasn't the physical labor or even the exhaustion. It was the slow erosion of my dignity. Every day I felt a little less like a human being and a little more like furniture that Fred occasionally barked orders at. 3 weeks into this nightmare, I was trimming the front hedge when Mrs. Henderson approached the fence. "Alan," she said softly, "honey, what's going on?" Martha would be heartbroken if she saw this. I stopped clipping and looked at her kind face. She and Martha had been close friends for 20 years, sharing coffee every Tuesday morning and comparing notes about their gardens. "I'm fine, Elizabeth," I lied, but my voice shook. She reached through the fence and touched my arm. "No, you're not. This isn't right, and you know it. Martha left you that insurance money, didn't she? $25,000? I nodded miserably. "Fred said I needed to give it to him to help with expenses. He said the house costs were too much for him to handle alone." Elizabeth's face darkened. "Alan, that boy is using you. This house has been paid off for 10 years. Martha told me so herself." The hedge clippers slipped from my hands as the truth hit me. Fred had lied about the expenses. He had taken my insurance money, the money Martha had wanted me to use to live comfortably in my golden years, and he was treating me like a servant in my own home. That evening, as I served Fred his dinner, I gathered the courage to ask about the money. "Fred, about that insurance payment, maybe I could keep some of it for personal expenses." Fred's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "What personal expenses?" "I provide everything you need." "Well, I'd like to buy some new clothes, maybe take Mrs. Henderson out for coffee sometimes. I haven't had any spending money in months." Fred set down his fork and stared at me with cold eyes. "Dad, that money is gone. I used it to pay down the mortgage and cover your medical expenses from when you had that chest pain last month. You're lucky I'm willing to take care of you at all." But there was no mortgage to pay down, and my chest pain had been a mild anxiety attack that required no treatment. I knew Fred was lying, but I also knew I had no proof and nowhere else to go. That night I made a decision that would change everything. I couldn't live like this anymore. I would rather die with dignity than continue to be slowly destroyed by my own son's cruelty. I started looking through the classified ads for any job that would hire a 66-year-old man with no recent work experience. The classified ad was small, tucked between offers for used furniture and pet grooming services. Live-in caregiver needed for elderly gentlemen, 12-hour shifts, room and board included. Experience preferred but not required. Serious inquiries only. I stared at the newspaper, my hands trembling slightly. A live-in position would mean leaving Fred's house, escaping the daily humiliation that had become my existence. But it also meant admitting that my own son had driven me to seek refuge with strangers. I called the number before I could lose my nerve. "Whitmore residence. This is Margaret speaking," came a crisp voice on the other end. "I'm calling about the caregiver position," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "How old are you?" Margaret asked bluntly. 66. There was a pause. "Most applicants are much younger. Do you have experience caring for someone with advanced Parkinson's disease?" My heart sank. "No, ma'am, but I'm a quick learner, and I cared for my wife during her final illness." Another pause. "Can you start immediately?" "Yes," I said, perhaps too quickly. "Be here tomorrow at 8 in the morning for an interview. 1527 Elmridge Drive. Don't be late." The next morning I stood in front of an imposing colonial house, its perfectly manicured lawn making Fred's yard look shabby by comparison. My one decent shirt was wrinkled from being packed at the bottom of my drawer, and I had polished my old dress shoes until they gleamed. Margaret turned out to be a severe-looking woman in her 50s, with steel gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She led me through rooms filled with expensive furniture and oil paintings, finally stopping at a heavy oak door. "Mr. Whitmore is inside," she said. "He's had 3 caregivers in the past 6 months. 2 quit, 1 was fired. He can be difficult, but he's not cruel. The position pays $800 a week, cash, plus room and board. Your room is in the servants' quarters, and you'll have Sundays off unless there's an emergency. $800 a week. I hadn't seen that kind of money in years. It was more than enough to eventually find a small apartment of my own, to rebuild some semblance of independence. Margaret knocked on the door and entered without waiting for a response. "Mr. Whitmore, this is Alan Matthews, here about the caregiver position." The man sitting in the wheelchair was not what I had expected. Howard Whitmore was probably in his early 70s, but his eyes were sharp and alert despite his body's betrayal. His hands shook with the telltale tremor of Parkinson's, but his gaze was steady as he studied me. "You're old," he said bluntly. "Yes, sir, I am. Most people your age are retired, playing golf, spoiling grandchildren. Why do you need this job?" The question hit me like a physical blow. How could I explain that my son had reduced me to a servant in my own home? That I was so desperate for dignity that I was willing to care for a stranger rather than endure another day of Fred's abuse? "I need the work," I said simply. Howard stared at me for a long moment, those keen eyes seeming to see right through me. "Margaret, leave us alone for a minute." When the door closed, Howard wheeled his chair closer to where I stood. "I've been rich my whole life, Matthews. Built my first company when I was 25, sold it for $10 million by 30. I can smell desperation, and I can smell lies. You reek of both. So tell me the truth. Why does a man your age need to become a caregiver?" I looked down at my hands, seeing the cuts and calluses from weeks of yard work and car washing. When I looked back up, Howard was still waiting. "My wife died 3 months ago," I said quietly. "My son convinced me to sign over my house to him during her illness. Now he treats me like hired help. I wash his car, mow his lawn, clean his house. He took my insurance money and gives me nothing but a place to sleep and whatever food he doesn't want." Howard's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "What's your son's name?" "Fred. Fred Matthews." "Fred Matthews," Howard repeated, rolling the name around like he was tasting something bitter. "And you're willing to leave everything you know to take care of a sick old stranger rather than stand up to your own boy." The words stung because they were true. I tried standing up to him once. He reminded me that I have nowhere else to go. Howard was quiet for several minutes, his shaking hands resting on the arms of his wheelchair. Finally he spoke. "I have 3 children, Matthews, 2 sons and a daughter. Want to know when they last visited me? My daughter called 6 months ago, needed money for her 3rd divorce. My oldest son showed up last Christmas, spent 20 minutes here before asking if I'd changed my will lately. My youngest hasn't spoken to me in 2 years, not since I refused to bail out his failing restaurant." He wheeled over to the window overlooking a garden that rivaled anything I'd ever seen. "People think being rich solves everything. It doesn't. It just makes you a target for everyone who wants something from you, including your own flesh and blood." When he turned back to me, his expression was almost gentle. "The job is yours if you want it. 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, with Sundays off. I need help with basic tasks, medication reminders, and someone to make sure I don't fall when I'm stubborn enough to try walking on my own." "What happened to the other caregivers?" I asked. A ghost of a smile crossed Howard's face. "The first one kept trying to rearrange my schedule to fit her social life. The second one talked constantly, never stopped chattering about her boyfriend problems. The third one I caught taking pictures of my personal belongings, probably planning to sell information to gossip magazines." "I don't have a social life to speak of," I said. "I don't gossip and I don't steal." "No," Howard said, studying me again. "I don't think you do. Margaret will show you to your room. We'll start Monday morning." As I followed Margaret to the servants' quarters, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. The room was small but clean, with a comfortable bed, a desk, and a window overlooking the garden. It had its own bathroom and a small kitchenette. "Mr. Whitmore's routine is strict," Margaret explained as she handed me a typed schedule. "Medications at 8, noon, 4, and bedtime. He likes his breakfast at exactly 7:30, lunch at 12:30, dinner at 6. He reads the financial papers every morning and watches the news at 7 p.m. No exceptions." "What about family visits?" I asked. Margaret's laugh was bitter. "What family visits? In the 6 years I've worked here, his children have probably spent a total of 5 hours in this house. Christmas cards and birthday cards asking for money, that's about it." That evening, I returned to Fred's house to pack my few belongings. Fred was in the living room watching television when I walked in. "Where have you been all day?" he demanded without looking away from the screen. "The pool needs skimming, and I want the car detailed before my date tonight." "I won't be doing that anymore," I said quietly. Fred turned then, his face already darkening with anger. "What did you say?" "I found a job, a live-in caregiver position. I'm moving out tomorrow." For a moment, Fred just stared at me, as if he couldn't process what I had said. Then he stood up, his fists clenched. "You ungrateful old bastard," he snarled. "After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me? Who's going to take care of this place? Who's going to maintain the property value of my investment? Hire someone, I said, surprised by how calm my own voice sounded. With the insurance money you took from me, you should be able to afford it. Fred's face turned red. That money was payment for room and board. You think living here was free? I know this house has been paid off for 10 years, I said. Martha told Mrs. Henderson. For the first time since his mother's death, Fred looked genuinely shaken. He had been caught in his lie, and we both knew it. Fine, he said finally. Go play nursemaid to some stranger, but don't come crawling back to me when it doesn't work out. And don't expect any help from me ever again. I packed my clothes into the same suitcase Martha and I had used for our honeymoon 43 years ago. As I closed it, I looked around the guest room one last time. This house held so many memories, but they were memories of the family I used to have, not the cruel stranger my son had become. The next morning, as I carried my suitcase to the taxi waiting in the driveway, Fred watched from the front window. I didn't wave goodbye. There was nothing left to say. My first week caring for Howard was a series of small disasters and learning experiences. The man was particular about everything, from the exact temperature of his morning coffee to the way his newspapers had to be folded. But unlike Fred's constant criticism, Howard's corrections came with explanations. The coffee needs to be 170 degrees, he told me on my third morning. Any hotter and it burns my tongue, any cooler and it tastes like dishwater. My hands shake too much to check the temperature myself, so I'm depending on you to get it right. I found myself genuinely wanting to please him, not out of fear, but out of respect. Howard treated me like a person, not a servant. When I made mistakes, he was patient. When I did something right, he noticed. The hardest part was watching him struggle with tasks that should have been simple. Buttoning his shirts took 15 minutes. Holding a fork steady enough to eat required intense concentration. Sometimes the frustration would overwhelm him, and he would curse his failing body with words that would have made a sailor blush. "This damned disease," he muttered one morning after dropping his coffee cup for the third time. 40 years I ran companies, made decisions that affected thousands of people, and now I can't even hold a cup without my hands betraying me. I knelt down to clean up the spilled coffee, choosing my words carefully. My wife used to say that our bodies might fail us, but our minds and hearts are stronger than we think. Howard was quiet for a moment. Your wife sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. Martha could find something positive in any situation. Even when she was dying, she spent her last days making sure I knew how to cook her recipes and remembered to take my blood pressure medication. How long were you married? 42 years. We met when I was 24 and she was 22. She was working as a secretary at the bank where I had my first job as a teller. Howard's expression softened. 42 years. That's longer than most people these days can commit to anything. Over the following weeks, our morning conversations became longer. Howard would share stories about building his business empire, the risks he had taken, the deals that had made him wealthy. I found myself looking forward to these talks. It had been months since anyone had treated me as if my thoughts and experiences mattered. I started with nothing, Howard told me one morning as I helped him with his medication. My father died when I was 16, left my mother with 4 kids and a pile of debt. I worked construction during the day and went to night school for business classes. Took me 8 years to get my degree, but I got it. What was your first business? I asked, genuinely curious. Construction supplies. I noticed that contractors were always running short on materials because suppliers couldn't deliver quickly enough. So I started a company that guaranteed same-day delivery within a 50-mile radius. Worked myself to death for 10 years, but by the time I was 35, I had 12 warehouses and 200 employees. I could see the pride in his eyes as he remembered those early days. You built something real, I said. I did. And then I sold it and started over. Real estate development, then manufacturing, then tech companies. Each time, I thought I was building something to pass down to my children. His voice grew bitter. Turns out they were more interested in spending what I built than learning how to build anything themselves. One evening, about a month into my employment, Howard had what Margaret called one of his episodes. I found him in his study, slumped in his wheelchair, tears streaming down his face. His whole body was shaking, not just from the Parkinson's, but from something deeper. Mr. Whitmore, I approached carefully. Are you in pain? Should I call the doctor? He shook his head, struggling to speak through the tremors. Just had a call from my son, Richard. Wants me to invest in another one of his brilliant schemes. When I said no, he told me I was a selfish old man who was too stubborn to help his own family. I pulled up a chair and sat beside him. I'm sorry, 43 years old, and he's never held a real job in his life. Everything I gave him, he wasted. Every opportunity, he squandered. And now he calls me selfish because I won't throw good money after bad. The pain in Howard's voice was so familiar, it made my chest ache. Sons can be complicated, I said quietly. Howard looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. You're Fred. He's not much different, is he? I had never told Howard the full extent of Fred's cruelty, but somehow he had pieced it together from the little things I had mentioned. No, I suppose he's not. The difference is, my boys were spoiled from birth. They never learned the value of work because everything was handed to them. You're Fred, he should know better. You raised him with values, didn't you? I nodded. Martha and I tried to teach him right from wrong, the importance of family, of taking care of each other. But money changes people, Howard said bitterly. Or maybe it just reveals who they really were all along. That night, I lay in my small room thinking about Howard's words. Had Fred always been capable of such cruelty, or had Martha's death and the stress of medical bills somehow broken something inside him? I wanted to believe the latter, but deep down, I was starting to accept that my son might simply be a person who put his own comfort above everything else, including his father's dignity. The next morning, Howard seemed different, more thoughtful, watching me with an intensity that made me slightly uncomfortable. Alan, he said as I helped him into his wheelchair, how long has it been since you did something just for yourself, something that made you happy? The question caught me off guard. I don't know. A long time, I suppose. Before Martha got sick? I thought about it. Maybe even before that. When Fred was young, everything Martha and I did was focused on providing for him, making sure he had opportunities we never had. Then when he was grown, we were so focused on keeping the family together, maintaining traditions. Howard nodded slowly. I made the same mistake. Spent so much time building an empire for my children that I forgot to enjoy any of it myself. Now look at us. Two old men who sacrificed everything for ungrateful sons. At least you accomplished something extraordinary, I said. You built companies, created jobs, made a real impact. And you raised a family, maintained a 42-year marriage, cared for your wife through her final illness. Don't diminish that, Alan. Love and loyalty are rarer than money. That afternoon, Howard asked me to wheel him out to the garden. It was a beautiful October day, the kind of crisp autumn weather that Martha had always loved. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the gardener rake leaves. Alan, Howard said eventually, I want to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Of course. If money weren't an issue, if you could live anywhere, do anything, what would you choose? I considered the question seriously. I think I'd like a small place with a garden. Nothing fancy, just somewhere quiet where I could grow vegetables and maybe some flowers. Martha always said I had good hands for growing things. What about travel? Adventures? There's a whole world out there. I shook my head. I'm not an adventurous man, Mr. Whitmore. I find peace in simple things, a good book, a well-tended garden, meaningful conversation with someone who actually listens. Howard was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. Do you know what I regret most about my life, Alan? What's that? I spent so much time accumulating wealth that I forgot to accumulate friends. Real friends, not business associates or people who wanted something from me. I have all this money, and no one to share it with who gives a damn about me as a person. You have Margaret, I offered. Howard chuckled. Margaret is an excellent employee, but she's not a friend. She does her job professionally, but she goes home to her own life every evening. She doesn't care whether I'm happy or sad, as long as I pay her salary. And you have me now. Howard turned to look at me, and I was surprised by the intensity of his gaze. Do I, Alan? Are we friends? The question hung in the air between us. In the 6 weeks I had been working for him, Howard had shown me more respect and kindness than my own son had in months. He asked about my day, listened to my stories about Martha, treated me like a human being with thoughts and feelings worth considering. Yes, I said quietly, I think we are. Howard smiled then, the first genuine smile I had seen from him since I arrived. Good, because I've been thinking about something, and I need a friend's advice, not an employee's. 3 months had passed since I started caring for Howard, and I had settled into a routine that felt more like friendship than employment. Every morning, we would share coffee and discuss the news. Howard's mind was as sharp as ever, and he often offered insights about business and politics that made me see things differently. For the first time since Martha's death, I looked forward to each new day, but I could see that Howard was declining. The tremors were getting worse, and he was having more difficulty with basic tasks. Some mornings it took him nearly an hour just to get dressed, even with my help. He never complained, but I could see the frustration in his eyes. On a cold December morning, Howard asked me to help him to his study instead of the usual breakfast routine. The room was lined with leather-bound books and filled with the scent of expensive cigars he could no longer smoke. He positioned his wheelchair behind the massive oak desk and gestured for me to sit across from him. "Alan, I need to tell you something," he began, his voice more serious than usual. "My doctor says I have maybe 6 months left. The Parkinson's is progressing faster than expected, and my heart isn't strong enough to handle much more." The words hit me like a physical blow. I had grown genuinely fond of this difficult, complex man who had shown me kindness when my own family had shown me nothing but cruelty. "Are you sure?" "Maybe we should get a second opinion," I said, though I could see in his eyes that he had already accepted the truth. Howard shook his head. "I've seen 3 specialists, Alan. They all say the same thing. My body is shutting down, and there's nothing more they can do except keep me comfortable." We sat in silence for several minutes. Through the window, I could see the bare branches of the oak trees, stripped of their leaves by winter's approach. It seemed fitting somehow. "I want to ask you something," Howard continued. "These past 3 months, you've been more than an employee. You've been a friend, maybe the best friend I've had in 20 years. You've listened to my stories, shared your own, treated me like a person instead of a wealthy invalid." "It wasn't difficult," I said honestly. "You're a good man, Howard. Complicated, maybe, but good." He smiled at that. "My children would disagree with you. To them, I'm just a stubborn old man sitting on a pile of money they think they deserve. When did you last hear from them?" Howard's expression darkened. "Richard called last week, supposedly to check on my health. Within 5 minutes, he was asking if I'd reconsidered his request for an investment in his latest business venture. When I said no, he told me I was being unreasonable and hung up. David sent a Christmas card with a note asking if I'd thought about adjusting my will to be more fair to his children. And Susan hasn't called at all, but her lawyer contacted my attorney about something called an advance on inheritance." The bitterness in his voice was heartbreaking. I thought about Fred and realized that wealthy or poor, some children seem determined to see their parents as nothing more than sources of money or convenience. "I'm sorry," I said. "That must be incredibly painful." "It is. But it's also clarifying." Howard leaned forward, his shaking hands gripping the arms of his wheelchair. "Alan, I've been thinking about my will, about what happens to everything I've built when I'm gone. That's not really my business, Howard. Actually, it is, because I want to leave you something." I stared at him, speechless. The idea hadn't even occurred to me. I was his employee, not his family, regardless of the friendship that had developed between us. "Howard, I can't accept anything from you. It wouldn't be right." "Why not?" His voice grew stronger, more determined. "Because we're not related by blood. Because I'm paying you to care for me. Alan, in the past 3 months, you've shown me more genuine affection and respect than my own children have in years. But your family. My family will inherit the bulk of my estate whether they deserve it or not. The house, the investment portfolios, the business holdings, they'll split roughly $80 million 3 ways, which is more money than they could spend in several lifetimes. $80 million. The number was so large I couldn't really comprehend it. Fred had been willing to humiliate and abuse me over $25,000 in insurance money, and Howard's children were fighting over an inheritance that was more than 3,000 times that amount. "But I want to leave you something too," Howard continued. "Not just money, though, there will be some of that. I want to leave you dignity, Alan. A chance to live your remaining years without depending on anyone, especially not that ungrateful son of yours." My hands were shaking now almost as badly as his. "How much are you talking about?" Howard smiled. $500,000. Enough to buy that small house with a garden you told me about. Enough to live comfortably without working. Enough to tell Fred exactly what you think of him without worrying about where you'll sleep that night. $500,000. It was more money than I had ever imagined having. Martha and I had considered ourselves fortunate when we finally paid off our 30-year mortgage. This was the kind of money that could change everything. "Howard, I don't know what to say. Say you'll accept it. Say you'll use it to build the life you deserve instead of the life other people have forced on you. I sat there, struggling with emotions I couldn't name. Gratitude, certainly, but also fear. What would this mean? How would Fred react? How would Howard's children respond when they learned that their father had left money to his caregiver? What about your family? Won't they be angry? Howard laughed, but there was no humor in it. Alan, they're going to be angry no matter what I do. If I left you nothing, they'd probably still find something to complain about. At least this way, I'll know that one person who actually cared about me will benefit from what I've spent my lifetime building. This is too generous, Howard. I haven't done anything to deserve this. Haven't you? His voice grew intense. You've gotten up every morning for 3 months and helped me maintain my dignity when my own body was betraying me. You've listened to my stories without judging me. You've treated me like a human being instead of an inconvenience or a paycheck. Do you know how rare that is? I thought about the past months, about the conversations we had shared, the comfortable silences, the way Howard's face would light up when I brought him his perfectly prepared coffee, or when I remembered details from stories he had told me weeks earlier. You've given me something my own children never did, Howard continued. You've given me respect without expecting anything in return. You've shown me kindness when you had every reason to be bitter about your own circumstances. I was just doing my job. No, Alan, you were being a friend. And friendship, real friendship, is worth more than money. But since I have plenty of money and not much time left, I want to use it to say thank you. That evening, Howard's lawyer, a distinguished man named Mr. Peterson, came to the house with documents to update Howard's will. I tried to leave the room, but Howard insisted I stay. Alan needs to understand exactly what he's inheriting and when, Howard explained to Peterson. I want there to be no confusion about my intentions. Peterson, a man who had clearly handled many wealthy clients over the years, reviewed the documents with professional detachment. Mr. Matthews will receive $500,000 to be distributed 30 days after your death. There's also a provision for a monthly stipend of $2,000 if he chooses to remain in the house until the estate is settled. I don't need to stay in the house, I said quickly. Actually, you might want to, Peterson said, glancing at Howard. Mr. Whitmore's children have been quite vocal about their intentions to contest any will that doesn't leave them everything. Having you here as a witness to your employer's mental state and the genuine nature of your relationship could be important. The reality of the situation was beginning to sink in. Howard's children would not simply accept that their father had left money to his caregiver. There would be legal challenges, accusations, perhaps attempts to prove that I had somehow manipulated or coerced a sick old man. Are you prepared for that kind of fight? Howard asked me directly. I thought about Fred, about the months of humiliation and abuse, about the way he had stolen my insurance money and treated me like hired help. Then I thought about Howard, about the friendship we had built, about the respect he had shown me when my own family had shown me none. Yes, I said quietly. I think I am. Howard reached out with one trembling hand and placed it over mine. Good, because I have a feeling the real battle is just beginning. Within hours of Peterson leaving, Howard's health took a sudden turn for the worse. That night, I barely slept, checking on him every hour as his breathing became more labored and his tremors intensified. Howard passed away on a quiet Tuesday morning in February, 3 weeks after changing his will. I was sitting beside his bed, reading him the financial news as I had done every morning for months, when his breathing simply stopped. There was no struggle, no dramatic final words. He just closed his eyes during a story about the stock market and never opened them again. I sat with him for nearly an hour before calling Margaret to inform her, then Peterson, then finally the funeral home. In those quiet moments, I felt the weight of losing the only person who had treated me with genuine respect in months. Howard had become more than an employer. He had become the father figure that my own son had failed to be. The funeral was a small affair. Howard had specifically requested no elaborate ceremony, just a simple service at the cemetery where his wife was buried. Margaret and I were there, along with Peterson and a handful of business associates. Howard's 3 children arrived separately, each looking uncomfortable and impatient rather than grief-stricken. Richard, the oldest, was a soft-looking man in his 40s who kept checking his phone during the brief service. David appeared nervous, constantly adjusting his tie and glancing around as if he expected someone to challenge his right to be there. Susan, the daughter, wore designer clothes that probably cost more than I had made in years and spent most of the service examining her manicured nails. None of them spoke to me, though I caught them staring several times with expressions I couldn't quite read. Suspicion, maybe, or calculation. After the service, Peterson approached me as I stood looking down at Howard's grave. "Mr. Matthews, I'll need to meet with you tomorrow morning to begin the estate proceedings. 9 o'clock at my office, if that's convenient." I nodded, still processing the reality that Howard was gone. What should I expect? Peterson glanced around to make sure we couldn't be overheard. "Based on my conversation with Howard's children after the service, I expect them to challenge the will immediately. They're already asking questions about your relationship with their father, suggesting that you may have exercised undue influence over a sick man." "I never asked him for anything," I said firmly. "I know that, and Howard knew that. We have documentation of his mental competency right up until his death, as well as recorded statements about his reasons for including you in the will, but prepare yourself for a fight." That evening, I returned to Howard's house, which now felt enormous and empty without his presence. Margaret had left earlier, her employment having ended with Howard's death. I was alone in the servants' quarters, surrounded by the silence of a house that had once been filled with our conversations and Howard's stories. My phone rang at 8:30 p.m. I almost didn't answer the unknown number, but something made me pick up. "Dad?" Fred's voice hit me like a punch to the stomach. I hadn't heard from him since the day I left his house 4 months earlier. "Hello, Fred." "Dad, I heard about your boss dying. I'm sorry for your loss." His voice had a strange quality to it, almost nervous. "Listen, I was thinking maybe it's time for you to come home. I know we had some disagreements, but you're still my father." Disagreements. He was calling months of humiliation and abuse disagreements. "I'm fine where I am, Fred, but Dad, you don't have a job anymore. How are you going to support yourself? Look, I've been thinking about what happened between us, and maybe I was too hard on you. You were grieving Mom, and I should have been more patient." The false sympathy in his voice made my skin crawl. Fred had never been patient with anyone in his life, and he certainly hadn't developed empathy in the 4 months since I had seen him. "What do you want, Fred?" There was a pause, and when he spoke again, his tone had shifted slightly. "I don't want anything, Dad. I just think family should stick together. Why don't you come home tomorrow? We can work things out." "No, Dad, be reasonable. You're 66 years old with no job and probably no references from your last employer, considering how it ended. You need family right now." The manipulation was so obvious, it was almost insulting. "How did you know Howard died, Fred?" Another pause. "What do you mean?" "Howard died yesterday morning." "The obituary won't be in the paper until tomorrow, so how did you find out?" Silence stretched between us, and I could almost hear Fred calculating his response. "A friend of mine saw it online somewhere. It was a lie, of course." Fred didn't have friends who read obituaries of wealthy strangers. Someone had told him, which meant someone had been asking questions about Howard's death and my connection to it. "I have to go, Fred." "Dad, wait, don't hang up. We need to talk about your future. You can't just—" I ended the call and immediately turned off my phone, but the damage was done. Fred knew about Howard's death, which meant he probably knew about the will. The question was how. The next morning, I met with Peterson in his downtown office. The building was the kind of imposing structure that spoke of old money and established power, all marble columns and polished brass fixtures. Peterson's office was lined with law books and dominated by a massive mahogany desk. "Before we begin," Peterson said as I took a seat across from him, "I need to inform you that Howard's children have already retained counsel. They filed preliminary paperwork yesterday afternoon challenging the validity of the will." My heart sank. "On what grounds?" "They claim their father was not of sound mind when he made the changes, and that you exercised undue influence over him during his final months. They're also suggesting that you may have isolated him from his family and manipulated him for financial gain. The accusations were so far from the truth that they would have been laughable if they weren't so serious. Howard made his own decisions about his family. I never told him not to see his children. I know, and we have evidence to support that. But prepare yourself for a long legal battle. Howard's children stand to lose a significant amount of money if his will is upheld, and they have the resources to fight aggressively." Peterson opened a thick folder and spread several documents across his desk. However, Howard anticipated this. He was very thorough in documenting his reasons for including you in the will. "We have video testimony recorded just 2 weeks before his death, medical evaluations confirming his mental competency, and detailed notes about his children's behavior over the past several years. He handed me a copy of a letter written in Howard's distinctive handwriting. He also wrote this, specifically for you to read if his family challenged the will. I unfolded the letter, my hands trembling slightly as I recognized Howard's careful script. Alan, if you're reading this, it means my children are doing exactly what I expected them to do. They're not fighting because they loved me or because they're grieving my loss. They're fighting because money matters more to them than the wishes of their dead father. I want you to know that leaving you $500,000 was the easiest decision I made in my final months. You gave me dignity when my own body was failing. You listened to my stories without judgment. You treated me like a human being when my own children saw me only as an obstacle to their inheritance. Don't let them bully you, Alan. You earned every penny of that money through kindness, respect, and genuine friendship. Fight for it not because of the money itself, but because it represents something important. It represents the value of treating people with decency, regardless of what you might gain from them. I had to stop reading for a moment as my eyes filled with tears. Even in death, Howard was protecting me, trying to give me the strength to stand up for myself. The letter continued. I know this will be difficult, and I know my children will say terrible things about you. But remember this, they didn't want my time or my company when I was alive. They only want my money now that I'm dead. You wanted nothing from me except the chance to do your job with dignity, and you gave me something far more valuable in return. Be strong, my friend. You deserve this, and I hope it gives you the independence to tell your own ungrateful son exactly what you think of him. I folded the letter carefully and looked up at Peterson. What do I need to do? First, we wait. The will is being probated, which typically takes 30 to 60 days. During that time, Howard's children will continue building their case. They'll likely hire private investigators to look into your background, your relationship with Howard, and probably your relationship with your own son. My phone, which I had turned back on that morning, started ringing. I glanced at the screen and saw Fred's name. That's my son, I told Peterson. I'd recommend not answering. Anything you say could potentially be used against you if they try to prove you're financially desperate or manipulative. The phone stopped ringing, then immediately started again. Fred was persistent. I had to give him that. Over the next 3 days, Fred called me 48 times. I counted them, watching the missed call notifications pile up on my phone. The voicemails he left started out concerned and gradually became more frantic. Dad, please call me back. I'm worried about you. Dad, I heard some crazy rumors about your boss's will. Call me so we can figure this out together. Dad, some lawyer called me asking questions about our relationship. What the hell is going on? You need to talk to me. Dad, if you're inheriting money, we need to discuss how to protect it. There are tax implications, legal issues. You can't handle this alone. Dad, I know I wasn't perfect after Mom died, but we're family. We need to stick together now more than ever. By the final message, his tone had shifted to something more familiar. Dad, stop playing games. I know you're getting money from that old man's will. If you think you can just ignore your family and live like some kind of millionaire, you're delusional. Call me back, or I'm coming to find you. That last message sent a chill down my spine. The threatening tone was exactly what I remembered from the months I had lived under his roof. The barely controlled anger that had always simmered just beneath the surface of his false concern. I showed the messages to Peterson during our next meeting. This actually helps our case, he said after listening to several of them. These messages clearly show that your son's interest in reconciling with you coincides suspiciously with news of your potential inheritance. It supports our argument that Howard was right to be concerned about family members who only show interest when money is involved. Fred doesn't know for certain how much money is involved, I said. Peterson nodded grimly. He will soon. Howard's children have been talking to reporters, trying to build public sympathy for their case. Once this becomes public knowledge, your son's harassment will likely intensify. As if summoned by our conversation, my phone rang again. This time it wasn't Fred. It was an unknown number with a local area code. Mr. Matthews? This is Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News. I understand you're involved in a disputed inheritance case involving the late Howard Whitmore. I'd like to ask you a few questions about your relationship with Mr. Whitmore and the circumstances surrounding his will. I handed the phone to Peterson, who took the call and politely but firmly declined any interviews on my behalf. It's starting, he said after hanging up. Howard's children are trying to win this case in the court of public opinion before it ever reaches a real courtroom. That evening, I sat in Howard's study, surrounded by his books and the lingering scent of his cigars. The house felt like a museum now, preserved exactly as he had left it, but empty of the warmth his presence had provided. My phone sat silent on the desk in front of me, finally quiet after days of constant ringing, but I knew this was just the calm before the storm. Fred would not give up easily, and neither would Howard's children. I picked up the framed photograph on Howard's desk, a picture of him as a young man with his wife on their wedding day. They looked so happy, so full of hope for the future they would build together. I wondered if Howard had ever imagined that his final years would be spent fighting with his own children over money, or that his greatest comfort would come from a friendship with a hired caregiver. Tomorrow, the real battle would begin. The legal battle lasted 4 months, but Howard's preparation proved ironclad. Peterson presented video testimony of Howard clearly explaining his reasons for leaving me money, medical records confirming his mental competency, and documented evidence of his children's neglect over the years. The most damaging evidence came from Howard's own detailed journal entries, written in his shaking handwriting, describing each visit from his children and their constant requests for money. Howard's children hired expensive lawyers and tried every angle they could think of. They claimed I had isolated Howard from his family, despite phone records showing they rarely called. They suggested I had somehow coerced him, despite surveillance footage from his doctor's office showing me in the waiting room while Howard met privately with his physician to confirm his mental competency. They even tried to argue that $500,000 was an unreasonable amount for a caregiver to inherit, until Peterson pointed out that it represented less than 1% of Howard's total estate. In the end, the judge's ruling was swift and decisive. Howard's will was valid, his mental state had been sound, and his reasons for including me were clearly documented and reasonable. Richard, David, and Susan would inherit the bulk of their father's $80 million estate as originally planned. I would receive my $500,000, plus the additional money Peterson had helped Howard set aside for my legal fees. The day the ruling came down, I was sitting in Peterson's office when his secretary handed him a note. He read it, smiled, and looked up at me. "It's over, Alan. The inheritance is yours." I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Relief that the nightmare was finally ending. Sadness that Howard wasn't there to see his final gesture of friendship vindicated. "There's something else," Peterson said, pulling out a sealed envelope. "Howard left this for you, with instructions that it only be opened after the legal proceedings were complete." Inside was another letter in Howard's careful handwriting, along with a small brass key. "Alan, if you're reading this, it means you fought for what was rightfully yours and won. I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself, something I wish I had taught my own children to do. The key is to a safety deposit box at First National Bank, box number 247. Inside you'll find some additional documents and a small gift I wanted you to have privately. Use this money wisely, my friend. Buy that house with the garden you dreamed of. Live the life you deserve, free from people who would use your kindness against you. And remember that at least one person in this world recognized your true worth." 2 days later, I stood in the bank vault, my hands trembling as I inserted the key into box 247. Inside, along with some personal papers Howard had wanted me to have, was another envelope containing a cashier's check for $50,000 and a note that simply said, "For the garden." That afternoon, my phone rang. I had been expecting this call for days. "Dad, we need to talk." Fred's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "Hello, Fred." "Don't hello, Fred me. I've been trying to reach you for months. Do you have any idea what people are saying about you? About our family?" I had seen the news coverage, of course. The story of a wealthy man leaving money to his caregiver while his own children contested the will had attracted considerable media attention. Some reports painted me as a gold digger who had manipulated a sick old man. Others portrayed me as a devoted caregiver who had shown kindness to someone abandoned by his own family. I found I didn't much care what strangers thought. "I know what people are saying," I said calmly. "Well, I don't like it. This reflects poorly on all of us. People are saying I'm a bad son, that I neglected my own father. Did you neglect me, Fred?" Silence stretched between us. When he finally spoke, his voice had taken on the wheedling tone I remembered from when he was a child, trying to avoid punishment. Dad, you know things got complicated after Mom died. We were both grieving, both stressed. Maybe we said things we didn't mean. You slapped me, Fred. You made me wash your car and mow your lawn while taking my insurance money. You treated me like hired help in my own home. That's not how I remember it. I remember it perfectly. Another pause, then Fred's voice hardened. Fine. You want to play the victim? Go ahead. But don't think this inheritance makes you some kind of big shot. $500,000 isn't that much money, Dad. You'll burn through it in a few years, and then what? You'll come crawling back to me, just like before. I felt something shift inside me, a strength I hadn't felt in years. Howard's friendship had given me something I thought I had lost forever. Self-respect. No, Fred, I won't. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm done. I'm done being your servant, your ATM, your whipping boy. I'm done pretending that what you did to me after your mother died was acceptable. I'm done making excuses for your behavior. Dad, you're being ridiculous. I'm your son. I'm your family. Family doesn't treat each other the way you treated me. Howard Whitmore, who wasn't related to me at all, showed me more respect and kindness in 4 months than you showed me in 40 years. Fred's voice rose to a shout. That old man wasn't your family. I am. You can't just replace your own son with some rich stranger. I didn't replace you, Fred. You replaced yourself. You chose money over love, control over respect, cruelty over kindness. You made your choice every day for months. So what? You're cutting me off? You're going to abandon your own son? The irony of his words would have been funny if they weren't so painful. I'm not abandoning you, Fred. I'm choosing myself for the first time in my life. You'll regret this, Dad. When you're alone and dying in some nursing home, don't come looking for me. I won't have to, I said quietly. I've learned the difference between being alone and being lonely. I was lonelier living in your house than I've ever been by myself. Fred hung up without saying goodbye. I set my phone down and looked around Howard's study one last time. Tomorrow, I would be moving out of this house and into a small cottage I had found on the outskirts of town. It had a large garden that needed tending, a front porch perfect for morning coffee, and enough space for a man to live quietly and peacefully. 3 weeks later, I was on my hands and knees in my new garden, planting tomatoes and peppers in the rich soil, when a car pulled into my driveway. For a moment, my heart clenched, thinking it might be Fred coming to continue our argument. But when I looked up, I saw Mrs. Henderson from my old neighborhood getting out of a small sedan. "Alan," she called, waving as she walked toward me. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I got your address from Margaret, Howard's housekeeper." I stood up, brushing dirt from my knees. "Elizabeth, what a wonderful surprise. How did you find me?" "I've been following the news about your inheritance case. I'm so happy it worked out for you." She looked around at my small cottage and the half-planted garden. "This place is perfect for you. Martha would have loved it." "She would have," I agreed, feeling the familiar bittersweet pang that came with memories of my wife. "Would you like some coffee? I just made a fresh pot." We sat on my front porch, drinking coffee and talking about everything and nothing. Elizabeth filled me in on neighborhood gossip, told me about her grandchildren, and carefully avoided mentioning Fred until I brought him up myself. "I heard he moved away," she said gently. "Sold the house and relocated to another state. Some people said he was having financial trouble." I nodded. I had heard the rumors too. Without my insurance money to cushion his lifestyle and no free labor to maintain his property, Fred had apparently struggled to keep up with his expenses. Part of me felt a twinge of satisfaction at this news, though I tried not to dwell on it. "Do you miss him?" Elizabeth asked. I considered the question seriously. "I miss the son I thought I had. I miss the little boy who used to run to me when he scraped his knee. But the man he became? No, I don't miss being treated like a servant in my own home." Elizabeth reached over and squeezed my hand. "You did the right thing, Alan. You can't let people treat you badly just because you share DNA with them." That evening, I sat in my small living room, reading one of Howard's books that he had left to me in his will. The house was quiet, but it was a peaceful quiet, not the oppressive silence of loneliness. Outside, I could hear birds settling into their nests for the night and the gentle rustle of wind through the oak tree in my backyard. My phone sat on the side table, silent. No one was calling to demand favors or money or servitude. No one was threatening me or manipulating me or making me feel worthless. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I was truly free. I thought about Howard often in those peaceful evening hours, remembering our conversations and the genuine friendship we had built in his final months. He had given me more than money. He had given me the courage to value myself, to recognize that I deserved better than the cruelty I had accepted for so long. The $550,000 Howard had left me was enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life, but more importantly, it was proof that someone had valued my friendship enough to ensure I would never again have to depend on people who saw me as a burden. 6 months later, my garden was thriving. Tomatoes hung heavy on the vine, peppers grew in neat rows, and the flower bed I had planted in Martha's memory bloomed with her favorite roses. I had joined a local gardening club and made friends with other retirees who shared my passion for growing things. I was watering my vegetables one morning when a young man stopped at my garden gate. He looked to be in his 20s, with kind eyes and a hesitant smile. "Excuse me, sir. Are you Alan Matthews?" "I am. My name is David Chen. I'm a social worker, and I work with elderly clients who are having problems with family members. I've been following your story in the news, and I wondered if you might be interested in talking to some of my clients who are going through similar situations." I set down my watering can and walked over to the gate. "What kind of situations?" "Elder abuse, financial exploitation by family members, emotional manipulation. Many of them feel trapped because they think they have to accept mistreatment from their own children or grandchildren. Your story gives them hope that it's possible to stand up for themselves." I thought about this request for a moment. The idea of sharing my story publicly still made me uncomfortable, but the thought that my experience might help other people in similar situations appealed to me. "I'm not looking to become famous or make speeches," I said carefully. David smiled. "Nothing like that. Just one-on-one conversations with people who need to hear from someone who's been through what they're experiencing. Someone who can tell them that choosing self-respect over family obligation isn't selfish." 2 weeks later, I had my first conversation with an 80-year-old woman whose daughter had been stealing her Social Security checks and threatening to put her in a nursing home if she complained. An hour later, I talked with a 73-year-old man whose son was pressuring him to sign over his house. In each conversation, I saw something of myself from a year ago. Decent people who had been worn down by family members who took advantage of their love and loyalty. I told them about Fred, about the months of humiliation and abuse, about finding the courage to walk away. I told them about Howard, about discovering that sometimes strangers show us more kindness than our own blood relatives. Most importantly, I told them what Howard had told me, that they deserve to be treated with dignity, regardless of their age or their dependence on others. As winter approached, I found myself looking back on the past year with something approaching gratitude. Not gratitude for the pain or the humiliation, but gratitude for the strength I had discovered within myself. Howard's inheritance had given me financial security, but more than that, it had given me the independence to choose who I allowed in my life. I never heard from Fred again after that final phone call. Sometimes I wondered if he was happy, if he had learned anything from losing both his parents, if he ever regretted the choices he had made. But mostly, I found that I didn't think about him at all. On the first anniversary of Howard's death, I visited his grave and placed a small bouquet of vegetables from my garden on his headstone. The inscription read simply, "Howard James Whitmore, beloved husband and father." I knew Howard would have appreciated the irony of that final word. "Thank you, my friend," I said quietly. "Thank you for showing me that I was worth more than I knew." As I walked back to my car, I felt Martha's presence beside me, the way I sometimes did in moments of peace. I knew she would have been proud of me for finally standing up for myself, for choosing dignity over dependency. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, and I drove home to my small cottage, my thriving garden, and the quiet contentment of a life lived on my own terms. At 67 years old, I had finally learned that family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about love, respect, and the choice to treat each other with kindness. Some lessons come late in life, but they're no less valuable for the wait.